We hope you enjoy some glimpses of village life on this video, starting around the 1900s, when Findern was a collection of small holdings, cottages and farms, with one or two big houses.
The Findern flower is the symbol of the village which, according to legend, was brought back from the Crusades by Geoffrey de Findern. There are still a few gardens in the village which have the bulbs, although they don't flower every year.
All Saints' Church, when it opened in 1863, after the previous building, dating from Norman times, was destroyed by fire. Notice how bare it looks without trees, the pond in front on the green, and the row of cottage roofs along the church wall to the right. These were demolished and are now a row of parking spaces.
This sampler, dated 1864, is by Miriam Coy, aged 14 years, whose father was the miller at what is now Tower House. It says, "Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth."
The centre of the village in 1920, looking from the top of Dole's Lane. This is before Ray Pollard's house was built on a field known as the Paddocks. The green at this time was not enclosed, just triangles of grass crisscrossed by tracks and a duck pond. The cottage beside the church was the post office, where Percy Haynes lived.
The church choir about 1915. What beautiful hats! Unfortunately, we have no details of the occasion, but it seems an impressive group of singers for such a small village.
1914. Children at the old Findern School, now demolished, but it was on Lower Green next to the parish rooms, where the entrance to Brook Close now is. Notice the poor condition of the walls and pillars.
The men's cricket team in 1915. The umpire was Billy Dunnicliffe, who lived at Porter's Cottage on Porter's Lane. Is that him on the right wearing a jacket? He also gave threepenny haircuts, no choice of style.
This is a smithy, which used to be in front of the present old forge on the green. The blacksmith was Charlie Yeomans, who lived at Mill Farm and charged 1 shilling a hoof to shoe a horse.
The Wheel Inn in 1918, decorated with flags and bunting, maybe to celebrate the end of the war. The landlord was Bill Pollard, who also had a small holding.
Yew Tree Farm in 1920, where Jerv Mather and Joyce Torrington grew up. The farmhouse remains on Dole's Lane, but the rest of the site has been developed as Archway Motors. The name came from the arched entrance into the farmyard, not quite shown on this slide.
James Walker with his wife Jemima and family pictured in their garden in 1920. They lived in a cottage opposite the end of Bakeacre Lane. The field behind was full of springs, and Jemima grew watercress and flowers, which she took to Derby every Friday to sell at the bus station.
The church in 1920. Note how the trees are growing. The clock at this time was a clockwork one and struck every hour, and was wound by Ray Pollard's dad. The bell was rung by Jim Ford, who lived in the first cottage of the row by the church wall. He also dug graves and swept chimneys.
Probably our oldest photo, taken about 1890, showing a vicar and curate with some children standing on the green in front of the church by the pond.
Findern School, pre-1920, with Mr. Bennett, the schoolmaster, on the extreme left. He taught all subjects and lived in Glebe House on the green with his wife, son and daughter. The son later opened a butcher's shop in a cottage opposite the end of Cromwell Avenue, selling meat no doubt slaughtered at the farm next to the wheel.
The smithy. Obviously not a very busy day. The man on the right is Richard Parker, who lived at Townend Farm, which was opposite the wheel on the corner of Porter's Lane, where there are bungalows today.
The younger children at the old school in 1921. Looking behind the group, we can see the parish rooms, which was used as a school while the new one was being built.
The older children, also in 1921, photographed in the same spot and showing some pretty poor brickwork. There was no secondary school. Children started at 5 years and left at 13 or 14 years old.
A chapel outing in 1925, probably to Alveston Lake. Mrs. Mather is in the centre wearing a white blouse with black trimmings and a brimmed hat. She was Jerv's mother and a stalwart of the chapel. Back row on right, Charlie Yeoman's son. Charlie was the blacksmith. Front row left in glasses, Mrs. Yeoman, caretaker at Findern School. Her husband is behind her to her right. Back row left, Albert Whitmore's mum. Middle row left, Cyril Lane's mum.
The Co-op bread cart delivering in Findern. The man at the front is Stan Ludlow, who used to live in Doles Lane. The baker behind is carrying a wide, shallow wicker bread basket, and another deeper basket is on the seat.
The new school building opened in 1924 with just 2 classrooms. Notice there is no power station in the background. This was not built until the 1950s. Behind the hedge in the picture was a footpath which went from school over the old canal bridge and onto the original Heath Lane.
A classroom in the new open-air style school in 1928. It must have seemed very light and modern after the cold, damp conditions of the old school.
In 1930, Bernard Atkins bought a lorry and started his haulage business. This picture shows him beside his original lorry with Percy Tomlinson to his left.
Looking towards the church in 1930. Notice no post office in foreground. The next door cottage was the baker's and cobbler's. Then there was a chip shop with a shed round the back where you could sit down with a penny plate. The gable end by the church wall was a cottage, now demolished. A view from the other end of the green, also taken in 1930. Not so many trees as today, and those we can see are much smaller. The road seems very wide, but no pavement, of course.
Men at the wheel in 1928. Notice the man on the front row with the hobnail boots.
Mr. Dunnicliffe on the left and Mr. Whitmore, Albert's dad, taken opposite the wheel.
The ladies' cricket team playing a match against the men's team in 1921. The sports ground was on Doles Lane, and the men had to play opposite-handed to make up for the cumbersome ladies' skirts. Jim Kirkman's mum is 4th from the right.
The next 4 photographs are scenes that have disappeared from Findern. This one shows mowing at Corner Farm, which is the corner of Longlands Lane and Heath Lane in the early 1900s.
Bringing in the hay on Common Peace Lane. This part of Findern hasn't changed much. The fir trees in the background are still there beside Doles Brook.
Townend Farm was opposite the wheel, a large rambling place where Jerv Mather's grandparents lived before they built Heath House. There was a large cedar tree in the grounds which, despite protests, was chopped down when the bungalows were built. The view from the yard at Townend Farm, looking across the road to the wheel.
A 1930s photo of just the lads at Findern School. Sid Ashmole is on the extreme left of the middle row, and Joe Woolley is 2nd from left on the front row.
A party at the wheel about 1932 for customers' children.
Some customers and the landlord of the wheel about 1940. John Hall, the landlord, is front row right with the enamel jug. Maida Middleton is in the centre front row. On her right is Whiskers, the night soil man. He came round collecting before the days of sewers, and after a few pints in the pub would sell his load to spread on vegetable patches or allotments.
This photo was taken sometime after 1953 when the old village hall was built. Part of it can be seen behind the shop. The photo is before 1966 when the WI paid for the posts and chains to be erected on the green. In the 1950s, the green was bought by the parish council for £50 as an amenity for the village. The double-decker bus Parked near the present hairdressers, there used to be a pub, the Bull's Head.
Afloat in the carnival procession in the 1930s. The old playing field on Willington Road opened in 1939 as the King George V Memorial Ground. Floats went from the village down Heath Lane to the playing field for games.
The ladies' hockey team of 1938. The village had 2 football teams, a hockey team and cricket teams.
This photograph, taken in 1940, shows a young Miss Price on the left, who became Mrs Lowe and taught at Findern until she retired about 1980. The girl on the back row, extreme right, is Kath Lee, who was secretary at the school for many years.
These 2 empty cottages on Lower Green have been demolished, but the white cottage with the pram outside still looks the same. Behind the empty cottages lived Jack Dean, who started the bus service from Findern to Derby in the 1920s, later to become the Blue Bus Company.
This was Charlie Willersley's farm on Lower Green, which was alongside the cottages in the previous photo. To the right of this farm was the old school, and behind it Brook Close was built in the 1960s.
This part of Findern has not changed as much as the rest of the present-day village. Other cottages have been demolished, many farms and small holdings have gone. Fields have been built on, but we can see some of the past recorded here.
The new sign, unveiled at the fete in July 2000, was made by a signwriter who lives in the village, and the wrought ironwork was carried out by a blacksmith with Findern connections. I wonder what changes the next 100 years will bring.